Well, we're going to move now to the audience. You all have had enough of me. Let's hear questions from other New Mexicans. These questions were just handed to me willy-nilly. The question is on the other side. Okay. Gabriella and J.T. Bullington, are you here?
Yeah, right there.
Please come forward and state your question. We have a microphone here that...
So I'm going to bring it to JD because I know where he's sitting, but the folks in the House have actually asked us to ask folks to come forward because they don't want us passing their mic all around. So if you don't mind, if when he calls your name, if you handed a card up, just meet me up here in the corner if that's okay.
Yeah, my question would go to Representative Kenny Martinez and others on the panel to the primary issue that you raised. And so the question is, and I think a lot of people have this question on their mind, would open primaries in New Mexico address some of the issues that you addressed in your comments?
Yes.
Yes.
Would anyone else like to elaborate on that?
Address some of these questions. And
open primaries?
Kenny said yes.
Wait, all for open primaries?
I've been primaried before.
Open primaries. Everyone gets to vote. Democrats, Republicans,
I like
mugwumps.
open primaries. I think then everybody gets to vote on everybody who's going to be a representative of the people of the district.
But if you have a political party, doesn't that party have the right to select its nominee? Or should people in another party come in and help it select its nominee?
Well, I think it's a more democratic process.
Anybody else weigh in on this?
I have a problem with it. I live right next to a state that does it, Texas.
I want to add that it's just not Democrat or Republican, it's declined to states or the independents. Mm-hmm. And most of our young people are not registering as Democrat or Republican. They feel they don't relate to them, and I get it. And when you say to the young people, you don't get to vote in the primary, and sometimes that's the whole game. Right. We do redistricting every year, and I can tell you that it's 30 Republican districts, 30 Democrat districts, pretty much always, and 10 swings. So if you're not in those 30 and 30, if you wanted to make a difference, you have to be in the primary to do it. And I think by not having an open primary, we're not allowing the young people who have decided that they are independents or declined to states, having an opportunity to vote in a primary where that's the only race that's going to be. It'll be decided in the primary, so I think open primaries.
I'm going to have one more crack at this apple, just as a devil's advocate. Young people, you're quite right. It may be a way to get them interested in politics. Why would they vote for someone then? Do they understand the different principles of the parties? Do they understand the different positions of the parties? Or do they like, hey, this handsome guy, or I love this? Why would they vote, and what would their vote mean if they're not voting for the principles and the programs that a particular party, as espoused by the candidate, publicizes?
They'd be voting for the candidate, and you know we're talking now
they'd
about
be voting for the person, ad hominem vote.
And it'd be the millennials now have a very interesting politics to them because they fit the mold of Democrats and Republicans a lot. And they want government out of their lives, but where government can help people who need it most, they certainly think government should be there. Support schools, funding for education. Should government be doing gun control? Should government be doing stuff with regard to taking away marriage equality? Absolutely not. So they're an interesting new group that have an interesting new thought process, and they need to definitely be included.
All right, let's go back to the audience. Kent Cravens.
Hey, Kent,
Cravens,
I'll meet you in this corner. How about that?
Good evening. Sam, thank you, and members, appreciate you being here. My question deals with economic development and maybe some of your perspective, and I'll just throw it out to anybody who would like to visit on that. Your perspective on some bipartisan approaches. Are we ever going to get right to work, and would it matter if we did? Just let's hear a little thoughts on that.
It's a hot issue. Who wants to start?
Well, I'll start on right to work as an issue. Maybe it will, anything we can do with the surrounding states that surround New Mexico, they all have it. We need to have that as something that is an attractive thing to business. It doesn't stop unions. It just says who collects the dues. That's all it is. That's all right to work really is it says who collects the dues. And the thing about it is, if
I
it'll
keep
help
learning
us,
a lot of things
if
today.
it will help us recruit some businesses in this state, great, because I think it will. We also need to make some changes sometimes in some of our liability laws.
What do you mean, it all depends on who collects the dues? Right to work says that you do not have to
join
a union.
That's right, you don't have to join. Of course, that's elementary part of it, is you don't have to join a union.
Okay, that's right. Isn't that the basis?
Well, that's part of it, but it also says who collects the dues. You don't
Well,
have
who
to
would
join.
collect
You
the
don't
dues
have to
if
join a
not?
union now, but you won't get the job.
Who would collect the dues if there's no union that you're required to join? Who
Well,
would collect the dues?
if I liked what
legislature?
the union was doing for me, I'd pay my dues
To whom?
to the union.
Right, but if you don't have to belong to a union, who gets those dues?
You don't
Well,
pay
the
them.
thing about it is, if you don't want to belong, you don't have to pay the dues. But the thing about it
That's
is,
right. So
the
no
thing
one
about
gets
it
the
is,
dues.
you can't get a job unless you join the union in New Mexico.
But in right-to-work states, you can get a job
That's
without
right.
joining a union.
That's right.
So you're not paying dues to anyone, are you?
Well, you shouldn't be if you don't want to.
You win. You win. Anyone else on the right-to-work issue?
Not on the right to work issue, but thanks for the question, Kent. I wanted to commend Senator Mary Kay Papen and Representative Martinez for their work on the Jobs Council, and that's a great example of getting together and having meetings frequently during the interim and figuring out what it is that we can do to grow jobs in the state and improve the economy. One thing that I think we really need to look at in New Mexico is the tax structure. We have a relatively high gross receipts tax. We offer, I think, $3 billion in credits, exemptions, other tax incentives that really have created a really Swiss cheese approach to tax policy. And so in order to make up for all those deductions, credits, exemptions, we do have a relatively high GRT rate. So one of the things that I think we need to look at is, are these exemptions and credits actually performing like we'd hope they do? They are, and if they're not, then remove them and reduce overall the GRT. Because in comparison to our neighboring states, we do have a high tax rate.
We do. And what about right to work?
Right. I'm glad Representative Gentry, Leader Gentry brought that up. First of all, thanks Kent, and talk about some nonpartisan work. Senator Cravens and I carried all the DWI legislation when we were there together, and we were able to move pretty big on doing some things that at first New Mexico was like, what are you guys doing? Ignition interlocks, and now it's become a model for other states. And we moved from number one in DWI deaths, touched your family more than anyone, and we were able to move our state down. And it's one of those things you continuously work on. But Kent, I'll never forget arguing on the floor of the House with you standing next to me. So thank you for that. On the Jobs Council, my wonderful co-leader there, Mary Kay Papen, we had gone through a cycle of knocking on doors. Most important thing was jobs. Imagine that discussion at a kitchen table when there's no job, can't pay the mortgage. We had to hire more judges, not to deal with crime, but to deal with foreclosures. So jobs are all important. And I thought that there had been this long debate between economic development and school children. So you do that, you're taking one from the other. But teaching children is part of economic development because you're creating the workforce, number one. So we got rid of that question. The government being involved in jobs, it always says, well, government doesn't do jobs. They do. We got rid of that question. So what was pork barrels now rebranded as jobs. So we understand that. But the last divide was this divide between industry and labor, which is divisive and dangerous. And I invited labor and industry and the politicians to be on the same table. And we did it at the Carpenters Hall. And the first question was right to work, and the two top economists in the state said, it's not true, right to work does not create jobs. It does create a divisive divide, and it does suck the air out of the room. And we spent many days on right to work, but all the studies show that it's not a job creator.
Okay.
So we're better off to have our brothers in labor at the same table with our brothers in industry, asking companies to come in instead of dividing them.
Okay, let's move on from here, but let me just restate the question, then we'll move on.
Hey, Sam, just a heads up. I think this is going to have to be our last one so we can get to our awardees.
Can we ever get to right to work in this state? Yes or no? Yes?
Can we ever get it passed?
Can we ever get it? Yes.
Well, in my
No,
years...
Quickly, sir.
Okay, we passed it several times in the legislature and never had the governor to sign it.
Senator?
So if we have one up there now, who knows?
I think we probably could get it passed. I don't know that it would pass with an overwhelming majority, but I think it could be passed.
Yes.
Gentry?
Yes.
Yes?
No, and it's a dangerous distraction.
Okay, thank you. Wayne, John, do we have time for one more?
Okay, here's what I'm going to suggest. Let's take one more, but I'm going to ask our panelists, brilliant that you all are, you have a lot to say. I'm going to suggest that we answer this one really quickly, and then this will be our last question. We'll get to awardees. And then a lot of you, bless you, have provided additional questions. My suggestion for handling some of the additional ones is that we send it to these fine lawmakers, and if any of them have any time or opportunity to provide us some additional opportunities, additional questions, we'll post them on our blog and submit information back to anyone who's interested that way.
Mr. Johnson, I'm going to pass over you because your question requires debate and discussion. Let me take a quicker question. Grant Taylor. Grant Taylor, are you here? If you'd state your question, sir, and if we could limit the...
Good evening. What is or are the disadvantage or disadvantages of legislative term limits? And what is the chance of legislators passing a bill that would limit their own time in office?
Go right ahead down the line, please.
So quickly, I was a member of the State Legislative Leaders Conference, so I met with all the leaders of all the different states. The states that had passed term limits were sorry that they had, because you lose guys like John Arthur Smith or Larry Larrañaga who bring that knowledge to the table that you would not otherwise have, and that knowledge and power moves from the legislative elected members to staff, which isn't always bad, but staff's not standing for re-election. So I don't support term limits. I think the most important term limit is the re-election, and if a legislator has not done a good job, they have to go in front of their public, and then the public decides whether or not that legislator is term limited.
Yes.
I'm of two minds on it. I agree with Representative Martinez. I mean, you do potentially lose a lot of institutional knowledge, but there are those politicians that the number one job is getting reelected, and if they have the notion that their term's going to come to an end, why not do the things you wanted to do? And so I think that there is benefit in that.
Go ahead. Excuse me.
I agree. I think that the election is the term limiting. If you don't like someone that is representing you and they're not representing you properly or the way you would like to have them represent, vote against them. And I think that is the way to do your term limits.
It takes 6 to 8 years in the legislature to really get to know people in government, get to know people at public institutions, get them to know you. Because this can be a really, really cutthroat world. And people do not reveal things to legislators until they trust them. And you can have people in the bureaucracy that can tell you things that are happening and how to fix it. And you can fix it before something horrible happens. But if you have this constant change, nobody really knows anybody. And it doesn't, in the states that have done it, they have had some real bad foul-ups.
Well, as
and
you
it just simply does, it sounds great, but it simply won't work.
Well, as you know, it didn't sound great to the Founding Fathers. They debated in the Constitutional Convention whether to put in term limits, and they concluded, as you have concluded, that they would. It would be called an election, so that if we don't like what you do, we throw the bums out, the great battle cry of American politics. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for this panel.